See me? Hear me?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, that's all that matters. Erev everyone. So on Tuesday night, I promised you the Chatam Sofer. So we started talking about Parashat Shkalim that we have this week. So we're running out of space on the board for all the additional parashiyot we have. The 4 parashiyot we mentioned, beginning with Parashat Shkalim, Zachor, Parah, Chodesh, are all in one way or another connected to the Beit HaMikdash. Connected to the longing back for the Beit HaMikdash, Zechen HaMikdash, Neshama Parim Sfateinu. And we mentioned that's very appropriate. Coming into Purim and Pesach, there's obviously a deep connection. Pesach is obvious. Pesach is one of the Shalosh Regalim, one of the festivals where we would go up to the Beit HaMikdash and bring korbanot, etc. What is the connection between Purim, however? Purim is the only Chag, only festival we have, which took place in Chutz La'aretz. Right? The Gemara says that's one of the reasons why we don't say Halal on Purim. Right? 3 reasons are given in the Gemara as to why it is Purim we don't say Halal. Here's one explanation that says that the Megillah, Kriyata Zoilula, meaning we do say Halal, just it's the Megillah, it's a different form of Halal. But the other explanations the Gemara gives, it says we don't say Halal on a nes that took place in Chutz La'aretz. Pesach was in Chutz La'aretz, but that was before we entered Eretz Yisrael. Once we enter Eretz Yisrael, so we don't say Halal on a nes that took place in Chutz La'aretz. There's another explanation, which is really 2 sides of the same coin, which is that at the end of the story, Akati Abdei Achashverosh, at the end of the story of the Megillah, we're still servants to Achashverosh in a sense. We still don't have, it's really, like I say, another side of the same coin. We're still in Chutz La'aretz, we're still in a foreign land, we're still under foreign sovereignty. And if you read between the lines of the story of Purim, so all of it is about Eretz Yisrael and the Beit HaMikdash. It's all there. It's not explicit. Everything in the Megillah is hidden. But particularly if you look at the historical context and you look at it in the context of the other books of the Tanakh, which took place at the same time, more or less the same period. We have stories we know. We look at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel, and a lot of these other books which are taking place in the same time period. That there's permission to come back. There's permission to start building the Beit HaMikdash. It gets stopped, starts again. This is all taking place in that period. So you look at the story of the Megillah. The Megillah opens up, tells us that it's in Shushan HaBira. That already should ring the alarm bells in our head. What do you mean Shushan HaBira? The only city that's called HaBira is Yerushalayim. And it's not coincidental. The beginning of the Gemara in Yomah, Machloket between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. What does Bira mean? Is there a specific place on Har HaBayit that is called Bira? Or is the entire Har HaBayit, is that called Bira? It's Har HaBayit, it's Yerushalayim. That is Bira. So already it says Shoshana Bira, that something's wrong here. This is not the actual Bira, this is somewhere else. Now we know the Megillah begins with the Seudah of Achashverosh. As Chazal say, he came out with we've got the words Kavod and Tifaret, which are brought there. A lot of the same language of the Bigdei Kuna. It says Achashverosh came out in the Bigdei Kuna, the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. He brought out the Kelim Shonim. We read in the Manginah of Eicha, because those were the Kelim that were taken from the Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara in Megillah says above all, why did this party take place? Why did the Seudah happen? So the Gemara in Megillah goes through a different cheshbonot. We know we have a prophecy in Yirmiyahu that 70 years after the first exile, that is when redemption would take place. Now, there are different stages of exile, and there are different stages of redemption. So when do you start counting the 70 years? And what happens at the end of the 70 years? That is ambiguous. That is intentionally ambiguous, because dependent on whenever we have a prophecy, and whenever we have dates and a prediction of when something will happen in Tanakh, it could happen in different ways. Depends if we merit it may happen earlier. If we don't merit it may happen later. So it may refer to different things that happen. So it says, the Gemara says, different kings came and made calculations of when they thought the 70 years were up. So Achashverosh made his calculation, and he got to 70 years. And here now, it's the beginning of the story. This is ends only 13 years later. But the beginning of the Megillah, the Jewish people are still in exile. The Beit HaMikdash has not been rebuilt. Says Achashverosh, okay, 70 years, let's have a party. And he says, that was the feast. That was the Seudah at the beginning of the Megillah, celebrating the fact that the redemption had not occurred. And that is why he brought out the Bigdei Kuna of the Kohen Gadol. That is why he brought out the Kelim of the Beit HaMikdash to celebrate that fact. So this is the Chatam Sofer. This is what he has to say about this whole story. And I'm going to read it to you, because otherwise you won't believe that I didn't make it up. He says like this. He says, he starts off, Mordechai in the Megillah is called Ish Yehudi, and he's also called Ish Yamini. Okay, the Gemara already asks this question. It says Ish Yehudi implies he's from Yehuda. Yamini implies he's from Binyamin. So different answers are given in the Gemara. Is it that his father was from Binyamin and his mother was from Yehuda? Is it that really he was from Binyamin, but he's called the Yehudi because he's Kofer of Avodah Zarah? Right, that's what Yehudi means. Different answers are given. Chatam Sofer raises this question and he says, I'll give my own answer. Like he says, so the Gemara Megillat Daf Yudbet Amud Aleph, it says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his Talmidim asked him the question. They said, why was it that the Gemara uses euphemistic language? The enemies of Israel. It's really referring to not the enemies. Why did they have the decree of destruction in that generation? Haman was going to wipe us all out. What did they do wrong? So Amaru Amruatem, says Rashbi, you asked the question, tell me before I give you an answer, what do you think? So they said, right, that they enjoyed, that they benefited, they took part in this feast, in this banquet that takes place at the beginning of the Megillah. That is the reason why they were worthy of destruction. So Vikshalem Lashbi, then the Gemara says, okay, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, if it's the case that the Jews in Shushan took place at that feast, so the Jews of Shushan should be punished. What did everybody else do? The Jews who were 127 provinces in other places in the world, why were they responsible as well? Sorry, I skipped. He says, right, says the Chatam Sofer now like this. He says, so Rashbi gives a different answer. We won't get into his answer now. But he says also that we can ask more further questions. He says, Rashbi, he says, wait a minute. You, Rashbi, asked the question. You say, okay, so I understand why the Jews in Shushan are responsible. Says Chatam Sofer, I don't even understand why the Jews in Shushan are responsible. So they benefited, they went to the party. What did they do? So they ate a bit of non-kosher food. Okay, it's not a good thing to do. According to one opinion in Chazal, the food was even kosher. But they benefited from the party. For that, they're worthy of destruction and death. And right. So the third question, why does the Gemara say that they benefited from the party, not that they went and ate at the feast? Okay, so says the Chatam Sofer, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what's really going on here. He quotes a pasuk in Hosea. Pasuk here is talking about the redemption that will come. And it says, Achal yashuvu b'nei Israel, when will b'nei Israel come back, be redeemed, come back to Eretz Israel? Bikshu et Hashem Elokehem, when you request, when you call out to Hashem your God, ve'et David Malkam, David their king, according to Mashiach, upachdu al Hashem ve'al tuvo b'chalit hayamim, and they'll be fearful for Hashem and for his tuvo, for his goodness. So that's what the pasuk says. It says, when will you come back? Hashem will redeem you in the end of days. When you ask for three things, you have to be sure Hashem, you have to be sure David Malkam, the king, it's Mashiach, and tuvo. So the Gemara says, what does it mean? What does it mean tuvo? He says, Zeh binyan Beit HaMikdash nikra ha'al ha'tov hazeh. Beit HaMikdash is called Tov. So these are the three things. In order to come back, they need to want it. Bnei Israel has to request it. We have to pray for it. We have to pray to come back to Hashem, to come back to have Mashiach, and to have the Beit HaMikdash. And he says, Im lo yivakshu, lo yigalu. If they don't ask for it, they won't get it. They won't be redeemed. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma'amid melech kasher ke'aman alehem ad shivakshu et Hashem v'et David Malkam. Basically, Gemara in Sanhedrin, he says, if they don't request for it, so what will Hashem do? Never redeem us? No. He will force us into having to request it. He will put upon us a king like Haman, and we won't have a choice, but we will ask to come back. So now he says like this, says the Chatam Sofer, this is what happened. This is the backdrop to the Purim story. Heyotam yoshvim tachat malchei paras umadai, hashaket v'ashana. At that time, Jews were sitting in the Persian Empire. Everything was calm. Everything was peaceful. Everything was was comfortable. I told you, I'm reading from the Chatam Sofer because otherwise you won't believe me. They didn't want to go back. He says they didn't want to go back to Eretz Yisrael. They didn't want Mashiach to come. And now listen to the words. Da'agu v'chaldu ulai yagia zman shivim shana. He says they were worried, they were fearful, they were trembling. Maybe the 70 years has come. Achashverosh was worried the 70 years had come, and what? And they'll have to go back. He says for the Jewish people who were there at the time, they were the opposite. They were worried the 70 years will come and they'll have to go back. They were happy where they were. They didn't want to leave. They didn't want to go back and have the Beit HaMikdash. And they were hoping not to be redeemed. Again, not making any of this up. This is the Chatam Sofer. And he says, therefore, we know from the Tanakh, we know that when they had the option to go back and to rebuild the second Beit HaMikdash, Sefer Rav and Nehemiah, 40,000 people went back. That's it. Most of them stayed behind. Etc. And therefore, so Achashverosh calculated 70 years. And he said 70 years have passed and they won't be redeemed. And therefore I'll have a feast. And what was the Jewish reaction, the reaction of the Jews of Shushan? And all those, he says, the Chatam Sofer, that's what it means. It's not that they ate the food. They took part in the raison d'etre of this meal, which was, Geulah is not coming. You don't have to go back. You can stay where you are. No Eretz Yisrael, no Beit HaMikdash. Nothing. That, for that thought and for that benefit, that is what they were punished for, and that is what they were nitchayvu klaya in that sense. Ultimately, the story ends well. They did tshuva and they were saved. Chatam Sofer concludes. He goes on a little bit, but he says that's what it means. Therefore, ish yemini and ish Yehudi. There's Mordechai. It's called an ish Yehudi. Yehudi is Yehuda, is Ben David. He says that was what the people were missing. That they were missing that longing to return back and to pray for Mashiach Ben David and to pray for the Beit HaMikdash. And it was through to the stubbornness. We spoke a couple of weeks ago. The stubbornness of Mordechai that to view himself as a Yehudi and to view all of them as Yehudim, and it's ultimately in that merit that they were saved. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha אומר, שהקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות ישראל, יפרח בה להם תורה מצוות, שני מעדני חפץ זמן צדקו, יגדיר תורה